I recently had a conversation that I would say changed my life. This past weekend in our church, we had a gathering of men and we saw God move and speak in our midst. During the break, we had an extended conversation with the other pastors that were there, and one of the pastors said something that changed my entire perspective on life. And that was, we are the ones who can't afford to fail. When others continue making mistakes, we must be careful not to do so. And this was coming from the observation we had around the lack of spiritual and moral integrity amongst the saints, and especially amongst those God has called to lead his people. The occasional scandals we are all exposed to time about a pastor having done this and a prophet somewhere having done that. When we look at the call of God upon our lives and the people God has entrusted us with, we can't afford to fail. There's something James says to those God has entrusted over his flock. James chapter 3 verse 1, he says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly." Unfortunately, in our time and in our generation, these kind of verses are often glossed over. But there's something worth noting here, that those who choose to teach and lead God's people, because of the position they find themselves in, where they're expected to know better, stricter and harsher judgment will be placed upon them by the Lord based on how they lived their lives. The failing and the stumbling of one fellow believer has the power to be a stumbling block to two or more believers. But to us who lead God's people, our lack of moral integrity and willful sinning can cause hundreds, if not thousands, to stumble in their faith walk. For example, if I may be found not being faithful to my wife, as a leader, I have the potential to ruin the faith of many people when it comes to the sanctity of marriage. And all of that would just stem from me being complacent and me not being watchful. Some of us can't afford to be casual in sin. We can't be okay with letting things slide. We just can't. Every believer who is an ambassador of Christ should be accountable to two entities, one to God himself and secondly to God's people. An ambassador never concerns themselves with presenting their own image anymore, but they task themselves with proper presentation of the one who has called them to be their representative. At times, the common misconception we often have is to think that every sin stems from evil intentions. That's not true. How many times have we sinned, but in all of that we had pure intentions? We wanted to make our friends happy. We wanted to be accepted by people. My sister, you just wanted to prove to a boyfriend that you love him. Or my brother, you honestly wanted to help the sister out and be there for her, forgetting that the Bible often warns us to not put any confidence on the flesh. So no, not every sin stems from evil intentions. However, every sin stems from evil desires. Your intentions might be pure, but your own desires might not be. James doesn't say it's evil intentions that lead us to sin, but he says it's our own evil desires that lead us to sin. So never trust your own innate human desires. Never trust your flesh. Never be comfortable with entertaining your thoughts for too long. For you who is saved by God, called by God, the stakes are just too high. You've been entrusted with more. For whom more is given, more is required. You can't afford to be comfortable. You can't afford to fail. My advice: be watchful, be sober, be accountable, be repentant. Never be the reason why when people think of God's holiness and righteousness, they think that is an impossible standard to reach because of the double standards and the hypocrisy they would have seen from your life. May God help us in this, and may God intervene on our behalf. Grace and peace.